So I framed this conversation as I'm just a few words about who I am. I'm a techie. I've been working in IT for many years. That's been my major you can see career path in life, and along that side has psychedelics been part of my journey. So I framed this conversation for you guys as this ancient tech for the modern man, because I really see psychedelics as ancient technology that we have had a touch base with as humanity over different time periods and in variant you can say invariant relationships over the course of time. So I wanna start this before we talk even more into microdosing. Just frame what is psychedelics and what is our relationship to psychedelics, because I think in understanding that we also can learn what it actually is that psychedelics do for us, and the relationship that humanity and mankind have had with psychedelics from the age of history. So I'll try to put everything in these 30 minutes. Else we'll continue when we're back from the breakout rooms. So Simon already introduced me. I'm a cyberdelic, so IT meets psychedelics, cyberdelic, psychonaut. I'm a microdoser, a dose coach. I do coach people who want to work with microdosing as part of their personal development. And I'm an LLP geek, educated coach, and in the midst of completing my psychotherapist with NLP as the main driver. So I really like words. I really like how we program ourselves and how we understand our inner workings as pieces of software using linguistic programming. So, all right. So when looking at the psychedelics in history, we often met with this notion of at least three distinct waves of humanity having an intersection or an interfacing with psychedelics, and there's an even one maybe prior to that called the stoned apes theory. The idea that at some point in time, an early human or one of our predecessors in that sense came about the psychedelic mushroom somewhere in the cow dung on a pasture somewhere, and the theory goes that is actually what kind of initiated our abstract brain. It what stimulated the different parts of the brain that could start to buffer and parse language, that could understand and interrelate to other of its kind. What we know from studies that have been carried out is that just eating a little of this mushroom changes your perception, meaning that you would have a better acuity in terms of, for instance, hunting. You would be more aroused. You would feel more comfortable in your body, meaning that's three factors that at this early time in history, if you were just a marginal better hunter, if you were more sexually engaged and felt better in your body, your tribe, your group who had started to take this mushroom in as a dietary in your group would have a competitive advantage. So fast forwarding this happening millions and millions of times, humans finding this mushroom and taking it into the routines could have had an impact on our evolution. And to put it into some sort of context to where you guys are coming from in terms of spiral dynamics, you could maybe even say that this could be from the base to the purple kind of pendulum swing. Maybe it's just a reflection, but at least after that, the first wave of this psychedelic interface, or the psychoactive plants with humans kind of kicked off. It was what we call, or we look upon as this shamanic phase, where humans were connected with spirituality, with nature. Our rituals kind of in relation to rites of passages and our relationship to seasons and such, kind of was into this intermix of these psychedelics. And you could say at this point in time, psychedelics was highly regarded and looked upon as a medicine, something that would be used for healing, and you can say balancing and equilibrating this relationship with the inside and the outside world. The next wave came, you can say, in somewhat later, at least many years later, after our civilized world came about, and you can say Christianity pushed back the shamanic and nature religions. Then the second wave came started in the 30s and the 40s, and of course culminated in the 60s and the 70s. The love, the revolution, the discovery, the rediscovery of what humans are, and everything kind of changed, or there was a lot of movement happening in our understanding of especially in terms of who we are as human beings. And there's an interesting side history to this. I've kind of parenthesized LSD here, is that just as Niels Bohr split the atom and we created the atom bomb at that point in time, the most destructive, most you can say incredible and fascinating and scary weapon that could blow everything into pieces. At the very same time frame, synchronicity, Albert Hofmann discovered LSD, the most potent, most mind-blowing thing that could dissolve kind of as you can say as a balance point. And LSD became the counterpart in the middle of both the Cold War and the Vietnam War. So you can say that there's some interesting symbolism in this psychedelic wave happening just at the point of time where humanity had gone to a point where we could really destroy ourselves, and we've started to lose track of who we are. And you can say that this wave could be characterized not as a medicine, but more of a mind expansion, our understanding of love, not war, and freedom, and music and art and such. So Nixon and the war on drugs kind of pushed back on this wave. The fear in our culture of this boundary dissolving capabilities of psychedelics put a hard stop to at least the official part of this part of the psychedelic waves, or the second wave. And right now we are in the middle of what is being termed the third wave of psychedelics. And what's interesting here is that we both have parts of this wave is both from, there's a lot of shamanic echo resonating in this wave. We see a lot of you can say new age kind of pulling out stuff from the old days. We see people going to South America to drink ayahuasca and be closer to the original shamanic traditions. And at the same time, we see science and spirituality merging and interfacing, as this picture here reflects a guy obviously on a couch somewhere having a psychedelic therapy session, but of course he's deeply immersed in a mystical or interpersonal spiritual experience. So there's something happening in this third wave, and you can even say that this wave is integrating the first and the second wave into mind expanding medicine. So the medicine from the first wave and the mind expansion we saw happening in the second wave are now somewhat merging or integrating into this. So why is this interesting? Well, from my point of view, it's really interesting because at every point in time, we've seen what psychedelics can do. It can work as a medicine. It can work as something that is expanding our mind and understanding, and it can even work as it does right now, as something that integrates these two components into mind expanding medicine. And in both the first and the second, and especially also now in the third, we see this very interesting characteristic of what psychedelics does for us humans. It it dissolves boundaries. It dissolves differences. It reconnects. It transcends. And interestingly enough, that's something we have maybe always needed as humans, but at least in these waves, we have seen how we have taken advantage of these capabilities. So I've experienced these three waves in my own life. So I'll skip those a little faster because of time, but that's just to give some understanding of why I'm doing what I'm doing, and now that we are in this frame of personal development and personal growth. So I've been surfing the psychedelic waves for 22 years. My first wave was when I was 17 years old. I was born and raised in a Christian home, and I was really not really buying into it. I was actually very much kind of not anti, but I didn't feel what my parents were talking about. I couldn't feel it on my own body. But I had a very, very, very deep, profound mushroom experience when I was these 17 and 18 years old, which gave me a spiritual awakening and really worked as a medicine and healed something deep inside of me that kind of was an ancestral healing in terms of my lineage of my parents and so on. Later, about 10 years later, I experienced this mind expansion where the psychedelics really was a revolution in my own life as a young man, how they transcended a lot of the shame and guilt from this understanding of especially sex and relationships and so on, and to where we are today. As Simon framed it, I'm 39 today. So for the past 4, almost 5 years now, my third wave have been going at it, where these two experiences are highly integrating right now, science and spirituality, and where I am right now is working with these psychedelics as mind expanding medicine, and that's also what they've become in my own life. So why is it that a guy like me wants to devote a lot of time and a life to more than 22 years and counting into these psychedelics? Well, from my point of view, now it's called psilocybin because I know that you've been talking about psilocybin, but it could be also other of the classical psychedelics. I really see that psychedelics in this wave that is happening right now is something that we need as a society. I see it as something that is and always has been part of our pendulum swinging when we have transcended from one phase to the other, either in these waves or in the individual's own personal life. I see it as one of the most promising aids or plant medicine that can help us utilize technologies that we have lost track of. We have immersed ourselves so deeply into our own human artificial technologies that we've lost the ancient technologies of transcending our egos, connecting with nature, and dissolving the boundaries and the difference between you and me. And I think that's what is very, very highly needed in our modern time, our current time, especially now, where we see a rise in in fear, anxiety, depression, and people have never been as polarized as ever before in our history. So these dissolving and reconnecting capabilities, I really see a use for them in our modern society. So just to be a little more specific, what is it that's something like psilocybin from the magic mushrooms, and why is it that it's often psilocybin that we talk about these days and not LSD? First of all, psilocybin, of course, grows naturally in mushrooms and can be found anywhere in the world. There's more than 200 species of psychedelic mushrooms containing psilocybin. And second, the reason why we see psilocybin especially as kind of the psilocybin solution is that it doesn't have the same negative connotation as LSD, which was kind of like the bad public enemy number one in the second wave of these psychedelics. And the last maybe practical part is that this psilocybin full dose trip is only 4 to 6 hours, where an LSD trip is more like 10 to 12 hours. So you can have a full dose psilocybin psychotherapy session within your normal daily hours of work as a therapist. So there's also that part of it. So psilocybin is very interesting as a molecule. It connects with one of our serotonin receptors, and it does something very, very interesting in the brain. It changes our connectivity, meaning that the normal part of the brain that is active when none of us is doing anything, if we're just hovering around and being idle, our brain is focusing its attention on one particular part, one area of the brain. You can even call it the router in the network of the different major parts of the brain. You have the all the different parts of the brain. They're interconnected with this from this area, and this area is called the default mode network. It's the network that can route between our emotions, our past memories, our ambitions for the future, our bodily sensation, the limbic system, and even you can say from the amygdala, meaning everything that we kind of sense, fear, and so on. This kind of part of the brain routes and abstracts everything that's going on. And if you had asked someone like Sigmund Freud or Carl Gustav Jung what that area of the brain should be called, they would answer the self, or the I, the ego. And it's also what scientists today, they don't name it the ego part of the brain. They call it the default mode network. But the conclusion is that this part of the brain is the area that is able to create abstraction, meaning the sentence "I am here" is an abstraction. The idea that I know that I am here is, of course, an abstraction. So this part of the brain is where we have our activity, and it's also where a lot of us have too much activity. If you look at a brain, if you do a scan of a brain where that is tormented of depression or anxiety or obsessive compulsive disorder, PTSD, and so on, you would actually see that this area of the brain has a lot more activity than a normal, well-functioning human being's brain has it. So there's something going on in this part of the brain. We are overstimulated in our default mode network. We ruminate. We have too many abstract thoughts. We are too focused on I, me, my ego, what I need to do, and so on. And one of the very interesting things that is happening when psilocybin enters the brain is that the activity is changed in the default mode network. It is lowered. There is less activity. There's less blood flowing into this area of the brain. Instead, we see that the brain actually heightens its activity in the major you can say the other parts of the brain, so being the prefrontal cortex, the lobes, and so on, they start to have a higher activity when psilocybin is entering the brain. And why is this important? Why is that interesting? Well, first of all, we now know that psilocybin actually do kind of dissolves or lowers the ego, the brain's ability to compute this abstract sense of self. And the second part is that when this activity is changed in the brain, we see something very interesting happening. These other parts of the brain that are now not routing through this default mode network, they start to oscillate in a higher frequency, the same frequency, meaning that the remaining part of the brain starts to oscillate in a high frequency, meaning that they can start to communicate more directly. It sounds maybe a little fuzzy or abstract, but imagine that it would be that normally you would use some sort of relay to call around when you need a message to go around. But now you start to tune in on the same frequency. All of you, all the parts of you in your brain starts to tune in on the same frequency, and are now able to call each other directly. You can even call it's the brain's way of being into peer-to-peer communication. And this peer-to-peer communication, this higher oscillating frequency in the brain is a preliminary, or it's a state of the brain that the brain needs to be in to promote a very interesting, you can say, state that's called neuroplasticity. The ability for the brain to create new neural networks, new forms of thinking. Meaning that if I cut out my abstraction, if I lower my ego, if my brain is able to communicate differently, peer-to-peer, I start to have the ability to form new ways of thinking and relating and experiencing the world that I am a part of. And that's really interesting, really, really, really interesting, because that's the scientific explanation and insights to what it is that these psychedelics actually can do and always have been doing for us human beings. And there's a lot of studies right now being carried out that we can see that that psychedelics actually promote these structural and functional plasticity states for the brain. So you can say the effects is that we change the connectivity, we lower blood flow into the default mode network, and we have a promotion of this neural plasticity. And a very interesting scan was done by Beckley Foundation of a brain, and this is of course a data visualization where subjects were giving placebo and then having their brain scanned and then given psilocybin. And this of course, the colors in the circumference kind of depicts the different major areas of the brain, and of course the lines between them is an indication of what this higher frequency oscillation actually promotes the brain to do, connect directly between the different parts. So you can say psilocybin and psychedelics give us a chance to change. It gives us a chance to transcend and reconnect and dissolve. And back to my why do we need this in our modern society? Why is this even of interest? Of course, you can ask rhetorically or concretely, do we need to change our society? Do we need to change our ego? Do we need to reconnect to nature? And is there a need to dissolve differences and boundaries? I have no doubt in my heart that yes, of course, this is the time we're living in. We do need to change and transcend and reconnect and dissolve. So that's why psychedelics are interesting. So where do we start, and how do we actually integrate this knowledge and this ancient technology into our society? Well, microdosing. from my point of view, is a very interesting integration point. I take that you probably know, all of you maybe, about microdosing, but here's just the short rundown. It's sub or threshold perceptual dosages of a psychedelic. Normally you follow a protocol. Maybe you do it every second day, every third day, every fourth day. You have chronology, meaning that you do it over a time period. You use your cultural setting as the set and or the setting, and you are the set yourself, meaning that this is an interesting and a very interesting frame of using psychedelics. Normally a full dose will be these 6-7 hours. You would have some baseline set, you would be in a setting. Microdosing, you do it over maybe a course of 30 days, 100 days, whatever, meaning that your life becomes the setting, and your general state of mind and your mood and your interpersonal neurobiology within your relationships and so on becomes your setting or your set. So this is really an interesting premise to use psychedelics this way, lower dosages, but actually integrating them in as part of your daily life. Yeah. So what is that we see happening with microdosing in general? There's a lot of anecdotal reports out there, and this is just a few of the reports back: elevated mood, improved stamina, and so on and so on and so on, mindfulness and so on. From my point of view, I experience that microdosing is doing exactly what I have framed, of course, in a less obtrusive way. It dissolves a little, it lowers the ego a little, it connects a little, and so on. So just in a microdose fashion, just in a small way, so that I am able to actually integrate this little less ego, this little more reconnection, and this little more dissolving of differences between you and me into my life over a time period, and actually integrate it and own it, so that I grow into this way of living. Of course, there's a lot of people actually also using this as an active treatment for anxiety, depression, pain in relation to PMS, and especially also obsessive compulsive disorder. And of course, these are directly, at least 3 of them are directly linked to a heightened activity in the default mode network. So that makes a lot of sense. Also interesting is that especially with pain, there's a lot of studies coming out right now with pain perception, that even small, very, very small microdosing in that sense, that the small microdosages are changing our perception of how we perceive pain. So people with chronic pain or PMS and so on actually feel a relief from this, because their perception of pain is changed. So what could go wrong with microdosing, or what could maybe just be improved? I've spent the last 4 years on this microdoser project, because I realized that it's easy to get started with microdosing, and it's very appealing, and it's non-toxic, and there's no, it's not scary. There's no fear of bad trips and so on. But at the same time, it's also not really. I mean, some are doing it very structured. Some are just doing it and see what happens. So I decided to do a project where I put myself on the line and followed myself for 30 days and videotaped everything and exposed it to the world, kind of as a way to create a baseline for how I would, or how I did, but how I would encourage anybody to go about and microdose, how I would work with an intention, how I would register my progress, and so on and so on. So that's been my focus for the past 4 years now, trying to set a standard for how we can actually work with microdosing, how we can actually work with a structured personal development, utilizing psychedelics, using these benefits, but doing it into a structured framework. So it doesn't just become something that I do and it's easy to get started with, but we actually really get the benefit out of it, and help people integrate it into their life and their personal progression. This is just some slide. I think I used my time already. I think ish.
No, I think you've got about 5 minutes. If you
All
can,
right,
you can
that's
make
awesome.
it.
Okay, yeah. So my first phase in this was, of course, to create a lot of kind of baseline material, how to get started, how does it work, what do you need to consider, all that. Done a lot of videos, followed my progress, what about legal issues, all that, just putting it all out there and start to educate people who want to go this path so that they can start on a different baseline than just stumbling upon some Reddit post about microdosing and then wanting to do it. So that was phase one. And so for the past maybe 2 years or so, I've worked on the second phase, which is the dose coaching part. How can I, when people are now on this baseline of microdosing, everybody knows how to get them and get the right mushroom and the dose calibrate and all that practical stuff. How do I actually then help and educate them to utilize this tool and this technology into their life, into their personal development? And I've created this framework that I use as my tool, and you can compare it or say it's like understanding of the spiral dynamics, the different phases, and so on. For me, this is the what I call the micro framework, which is of course an acronym for these 5 very important components: motivation, intention, cognition or commitment, resources, and ownership. So we started in the motivation. Why do you want to microdose? Are you away from, or are you towards motivated, and all that? Understanding the intention, what would be the evidence that you have completed? What do you need to think? The cognitive progress or process. What do you need to believe is true, or what's your limiting beliefs today, and what resources do you need in terms to fulfill this next phase, this next step you want to go in your life, and how do you integrate it, how do you own it, and what about your ecosystem? So that's the very brief outline of this framework and this approach to working with microdosing. My colors don't mean anything like the spiral dynamic colors does, or it's just to show. So this is the 5 steps. The micro is actually laid out on a timeline, or you can say on a baseline. So either you are very much on a low baseline, maybe you have a clinical pathology, you're very likely away from motivated, away from depression, away from, so there's different drivers at this stage in your life, and you want to move towards the normal baseline. On a normal baseline, you may be towards motivated, maybe away from motivated, and so on. And then from my point of view and my experience is that then people progress into one of these 4 baselines. The evolving baseline is an ever evolving baseline where you have self-leadership and work differently in your own personal development. And this is just to show that I really hope that this framework and this approach of integrating these I sometimes refer to the microdosing as the Trojan horse of getting psychedelics back into our society, because people are really regarding them as, it's a dose, you can't barely feel them, and they can even make you more productive, which is kind of we like that in our capitalistic society. And what I want to do and what I hope to aspire to do is actually to help people work with microdosing in such a way that they are prepared for, if they want, if they feel the pull or the aspiration to do so, work with mini doses or macro dosages. So that's the two top baselines, and the red arrows are just indicating some sort of a mitigation or risk factor. The more you've worked with microdosing and yourself in a progress, the more you know about yourself, in my experience, the less risk you have going into the higher dosages of using psychedelics, whether it's for creativity, ideation, deep body work, therapy, problem solving, doesn't really matter. So I'm on a path of lowering the gap between psychedelics being something terrifying, something that is to be regarded as dangerous unless you are a clinical scientist, and bridging it into something that we need to reintegrate into our cultural setting, something that we need as small tribes, whether it's just me or my tribe family or whatever, but something that we can harness and use as a tool in our way of living in our modern days. Whew. I think that was my last slides, and then just a takeaway slide of what I basically just said, I guess, about psychedelics, and then I think my time is up.